You can make up, but you can't make 100% of the classes. UTSA is pretty strict that these are not online classes. So once you're back on plant campus, you need to be in class. Your attendance will count on Zoom. If you show up on Zoom, the Zoom attendance, and you were here, 75 minutes. So I'll check the attendance for the Zoom using the Zoom report. In class, I actually take attendance right at the beginning. I know your names, I know your faces. We'll have somewhat of a seating chart, so I can do attendance usually in about 1 minute at the beginning of class. So if you miss a Zoom or you miss a live class, you can make them up by watching the Zoom later and submitting your notes, but you can't do that for the whole semester. So I'm limiting you just 3 makeups. After 3 makeups, you're gonna start seeing some deducts on the grade. All right, that's pretty important. I have students that think they're gonna Zoom the entire class, and that's not gonna work. It's not because of me. It's because UTSA's policy is these are not online classes; these are in-person classes. So you need to be in the class. Last semester, professors, including me, were a little more flexible because it's our first semester back. So if you have issues, call me early on. Don't hit me at the end. And group me, I don't have any group meets set up. If y'all want to set up something like that, Patrick, that's fine, but I don't have that set up. Definitely when you get your teams, you want to find some way to put those together. I don't use group me, so y'all may have to educate me on exactly how you want to use stuff like that. I'm more than welcome. Give me a call and we can talk about best ways to use technology. I'm an old dog, but I can learn new technology if you want me to. And then the instructor survey, if you do the instructor survey, it essentially adds 1% to your grade at the end. So that's a freebie. What amazes me is the students with the lowest scores are the most likely ones not to do the instructor survey. The ones most desperate for the 1% don't do it. The students with the 98.78% average, they're the ones that do the instructor surveys. So, don't understand that. I don't know why this says total value 5, but whatever that adds up to. So I guess that should have been 15. So 1,000 points. So the exams are 20% each. The individual project's 20%. Your group project is 20%, 18% for your group, 2% for your critique. The Excel applications is 20%. You add all that up, you get 100%. And then attendance and class participation are another part of it. Any questions on that? I know that's the thing that y'all stress out the most about.
Sure. So in the event that someone were to test positive for COVID, are we able to make up more than those 3 classes if that's what is necessary? Or
yeah, that's the case where if you call me, definitely we don't want you coming to class if you're sick. So I'm not saying 3 is the only answer, but don't assume. I've had students say, well, I'm working in Houston, so I'm just going to Zoom the whole class. Don't assume you can do that. So meet with me one-on-one, call me if those kind of issues come up. I'm not a mean person. So, I understand. I'll adjust as much as I can. Definitely doing Zoom and submitting notes it's not a bad way, but if students watch Zoom and submit really sketchy notes, I may not give them full. I've had some students, because I'll walk through most of the Zooms, I'm going through the class notes. They just send me the class notes. And it's like, you just sent me a document I wrote. That doesn't really help. So I need proof that you actually watched the class and were engaged. I mean, that's my thing. I want you engaged. One thing that irritates the life out of me is have students that come into my room, they sit in the class and they have nothing in front of them. Nothing to write on, nothing to take notes. And it's like they're telling me, Professor, I'm in the class because you take attendance, but I'm pretty sure you're not going to say anything of value to me today. So, and it's like, why are you irritating your professor? And plus, why are you taking a class that you think is worthless to you? If you think this class is worthless, you should drop it. Because I don't know if y'all know the competitive environment right now. You really don't have 3 months to waste on a bad professor. So you really need to be engaged, get into this class, learn this stuff. It's a tough world. It's also exciting because the opportunities are tremendous right now. It's an exciting time and a scary time. If you get engaged in your classes, you have nothing to worry about. It's the students that are going through the motions that are really, really struggling in this environment. So thanks, Patrick. I'll look at that and see. I'll try to understand. Um, or Nicole, if y'all can help me understand how that helps, if that's something the professors should be involved with, or if y'all doing that just between yourselves, y'all let me know. Someone educate me on that. All right.
I just created a group meet for the class. It's basically where the students get together and we ask each other questions before we like go to a professor, kind of
Okay.
try to solve problems on our own.
Great.
And I just created it and sent it in the group meet in the chat
All right.
for everybody.
Thanks, Nicole. Yeah, that's great. So I'll stay out of it. That's wonderful. You know, MIT, they actually require students to meet together outside of class. It's part of their, if you don't do it, you actually get a grade counter. So that's really good to do. The more interaction you with each other. I was talking to a friend of mine. He started a hedge fund in New York, and he spoke to my class, and he was talking about the importance of networking. And I asked him, what's your most critical network that you built over your career? And he says it was the people I met, the students I met in college. They're the single most important network. You don't think that now because they're not going to help you get a job, but 10 years from now, the friends you make now at UTSA are going to be really critical. So interact with each other, group me, those kind of things. That's really good to do. All right. So project one, you're going to pick a company. I'm going to let you pick a company you want. I'm going to do a lot of the legwork for you because we're not on campus and it's a little tough to get the data. So I'm going to show you a file here to help you with this. So a company you're interested in, not every company works. It has to be a public company because I'm pulling data from Bloomberg. And we don't want a company that has some serious problems. Like they've done nothing but lose money. Like Tesla does not work. You might want to do Tesla, but Tesla's numbers, they had a gross margin of like negative 600,000%. That doesn't work really well on nice little graphs. So it's just kind of a pain to deal with. So the companies that I've picked all work well. The data is clean. I'm not sure I'm going to update the data yet or not. That's why, right now I just want you picking the company. We're in January. And so I'm not sure how many companies have 2021 numbers yet. So you may be doing this a little bit old. It's a tough time to do this because we just went through COVID. So a firm like Carnival Cruise or Delta Airlines, when you see your revenues drop 80%, that doesn't happen very often. That your revenue, I don't know how many people at Carnival Cruise were running scenarios of revenues dropping 80% back in 2019. But it does cause some really tough analysis for these companies. And so I've tried to avoid those really painful companies. They can be interesting, but it just, when you're learning a new template and you're trying to learn finance, you probably don't want to do a company that has a lot of problems. Try to stick with something that's pretty straightforward. Like McDonald's doesn't even work right now because McDonald's has negative net worth. Why in the world does McDonald's have, according to accountants, they're insolvent. You all think McDonald's is insolvent, but they have negative net worth. Why are they buying back more stock than their net worth? Interesting question, but we don't want to do McDonald's because negative net worth messes up a lot of the charts. But you can certainly do Nike, you can certainly do Best Buy, Target, Costco. I love Costco, great company. AutoZone, great company, really interesting. So there are a lot of companies that you can do that are very interesting. If you're thinking about a firm that you might interview with, even if you're cybersecurity, and you're thinking about interviewing with Microsoft, pick Microsoft. They're going to be really impressed in the interview that Microsoft on the financial side. And guess what? This project you can do for project one, I've developed it to make it look as professional as possible. You could actually, let's say you're cybersecurity, you're interviewing with Microsoft, you hand them the project from this class, they're going to be blown away. They'll be really impressed. So, so pick a company if you're interviewing with them. It gives you an edge in interview because you just know the company that much better. So let me stop sharing. Let me share this file. I might update it. We'll see. Right now it's going through 2020. It's an alphabetical listing of, I forget how many companies. It's a bunch of companies. So Abbott Labs, you can see some students ask for like ABBVIE, I think that's something related to optometrists because I had an optometrist in my class. I pulled the data, but boy, it was messy. So you can see I said not recommended. All right, Accenture, a great company. And if y'all know who Accenture is, some of y'all would do a great job to work for Accenture. Y'all have ever heard of Arthur Anderson, the firm that went under after Enron? What did all their professionals do? They started this new firm called Accenture. Accenture, really great company, very interesting. Adidas, Albertsons doesn't work very well. Amazon works, American Eagle, Apple works, Best Buy. Someone asked for Beyond Meats. Obviously, Beyond Meat is a really good company, really interesting, but it's a new company and it's not making money, so it doesn't really work well. Boeing's not recommended because Boeing has negative net worth. And so firms with negative net worth don't work well. You can do an international company, but you really got to, we got to look at the data and make sure we got all the data. They really have to have American depository receipts so that they trade on the US market so that they're following GAAP accounting or it's not going to work well. CarMax works well. Carnival is in there. It does work, even though it certainly sticks out. Obviously, Coca-Cola works well. So I will put this file out there, even though I may still update it for 2021. So we'll see. I'm waiting just a couple more weeks just to see. You really don't need to do much analysis until maybe starting at the earliest, the beginning of our third week of class. That'd probably be the earliest. So what we're going to do is you definitely want to have your company picked by the end of next week. And you definitely want to have your data. So what's going to happen is I'm going to go through the class notes, which is going to cover all the accounting, all the financial ratios. I'm going to show you a template. We're going to walk through the template. As we go through the template, so the template's broken up between liquidity, solvency, turnover, margin, return on capital, and relative value. So that's going to be our template. As I go through the template, I'll cover, say, liquidity, which is the hardest part of the entire template. And that's where we disagree with the accountant. So it's a little bit of a struggle. So just realize we're starting with the hardest part. That's good, right? So it gets easier. So we start off hard and it gets easier. I'll do the notes and then I'll go through Walmart and show you what I do with Walmart. So what you absolutely want to do is when I'm doing Walmart, you want to have your company up on Excel with your data. So if your company is doing something strange, you can say, hey, professor, what's going on with Adidas on inventory turnover? I don't understand that ratio. That looks really strange. And I can bring up the company. We can look at it and say, oh, well, maybe they did this or maybe they did that, those type of things. Or maybe you're doing Chipotle. So, what my word, what happened 5 years ago? Well, that's when they had their food poisoning issue. Oh, okay, that makes sense. Their revenues dropped off. So it gives you some understanding of what's going on because your company may not be doing what Walmart's doing. Walmart's a fairly unusual company. They actually have negative working capital. The accountants say that's bad. Finance says that's wonderful. But your firm probably will not have negative working capital. Will probably have positive working capital. So you'll have to figure out how to interpret my company. All right, so does everybody understand that? We're going to walk in detail through the notes, then through Walmart, and you want to make sure you're ready to go with your company so you can ask questions as we go. All right. So your goal right now is to pick which company you want to do. If there's a company you're really interested in and you don't see it in here, so if a student asks me for a company, I pull the data. And if it doesn't work, I just let you know it doesn't work. So if it's not in here, that means no one's asking for that company before. Now I'm already, there's Tesla right there. Why doesn't Tesla work? Let's see if I can find a good example. I'm not seeing anything jumping out right now. It's an issue, but they have done nothing but lose money for most years, so that's certainly a big part of it. Their gross margins have actually gotten back to normal. So their gross margins used to be just massively negative. This actually doesn't go back as far as the numbers I have. So if you go back further, you can see some really strange numbers. So you don't want to do them. There's some firms in here that people ask for that are interesting. Southwest Air works really, really well. Even though their revenues dropped dramatically, it still works really, really well. So, obviously they lost money, and it's okay that they lost money. We just need for their net worth be positive, and their net worth is positive. Now, if you're not sure about company to pick, the easiest thing to do is retail. The Targets, I don't have Wendy's in here, but restaurants, Panera, those type of firms, they work really, really well because they have all the standard data. They have inventories, they have accounts, not all of them accounts receivable, but they have the standard stuff. So if you're not sure, go as much retail as you can, and that just makes it a lot easier. Okay. Like Procter & Gamble. Procter & Gamble is one of the most straightforward companies out there. Very simple company, very straightforward. They don't do radically different things. I mean, look at their revenues, and they're pretty consistent over time. They've had some ups and downs, but pretty consistent over time. This is your end product for project one. And the format, I started using this format several years ago. I think it looks very professional. One of my students used it in a paper, and what he did is he went to a financial journal and he looked at these professional journals, and he used their format. So an abstract and in columns with really thin margins. I mean, does it look pretty professional to you? It's like a fairly decent paper, doesn't it? Just looking at it. So you want to, one thing is really, really important on LinkedIn is you start putting papers out there. This is a paper you can put out there. So I try to make it look as professional as possible. So when you put it out there, when people load it, it just looks really, really good. If you're writing papers that are double space, boy, you need to stop doing that. That looks, an employer sees that and it says, oh, that's a college student paper. So double space. I know you think we grade based on number of pages, but we don't. I don't care how many pages it is. I want to know the substance of it. Double space is not good. Thin margins is not good. 2 columns. I really like 2 columns. I've had professors complain. All my students have gone to this format and they don't like 2 columns, but you need to do something that looks really professional. This one doesn't look as professional as some of the other papers just because of all the charts in it. But if you saw some of the other papers in some other classes, it's really, really impressive. I had one student in the class that had a paper similar to this, but just much longer. She showed the paper and they hired her on the spot just because it just looks so professional and, it was really well written. So start building your portfolio, and this is a good place to start. Hopefully you've had other classes. I had students talk to some students at UT Austin, and they're talking about the papers they were writing. And UT Austin students say, we never write papers. We just do multiple choice. And so you write these papers, you get them out on LinkedIn, it will distinguish you from other schools. It is a huge advantage. So I don't know, y'all have a good portfolio yet of papers? Anybody out there? Are y'all writing papers in classes, or is this kind of freaking you out that you got to write a paper? Anybody have a good experience with papers so far that you put on LinkedIn? Not seeing any yes head shaking. So start building them now. Start thinking about that. That's almost, to me, you're taking a class, you have a choice between 2 professors. Pick the one that does papers and avoid the one that does multiple choice, because multiple choice is just not going to help you get a job at all. All right, so this is where we're headed. You're actually going to go in and load this file. You're going to search for the word Walmart and replace it with your company. And then you're going to go through and pull in the exact same charts, but for your company. And then you're going to talk about them. And I have a YouTube video that actually walks you through this entire thing. Shows you how to get the data into the Excel, how to get the charts, how to bring the charts in the Word, and then how you interpret them. The YouTube that I have doesn't go in detail on all the ratios because we're going to do that in class, but it just refreshes your memory real quickly about how to bring this stuff in. Okay, so I'm going to give you as much as I can to help you get through that. The analysis, but it follows that analysis just real strictly all the way throughout. And at the very end, the Excel spreadsheet that we're going to use, you're going to put that at the very end so you have something that looks really financial and really professional. All right. So that's project one. So what do you need to do on project one? Pick your company. All right. Your honor students, there's at least 3 of you going, oh, I got to write this paper this weekend. No, you can't. It's not possible. We haven't even started yet. So that's not your goal. Your goal is just pick your company. Okay. Any questions about companies that you might be interested in? I usually off the top of my head know if one works or not.
Does EY work?
EY?
Mhm.
No, they're a partnership, so they won't have any public data. I'm using Bloomberg as my source. I know Capital IQ. So Capital IQ, we might use some Capital IQ in this class as well. In fact, I might show you, I'm part of Project One. I might go over and get Walmart's Capital IQ. If you're a finance major or an accounting major, you really need to learn Bloomberg. I don't know how many, I know Dante, you could teach us all a Bloomberg class. So Dante has a class he teaches for the Investment Society. You could actually go in and learn Bloomberg on. But if you're a finance major and accounting major, you should learn Bloomberg. If you don't want to take an Investment Society class, you can go in and teach yourself. Bloomberg has a tutorial. But you also want to learn Capital IQ. Capital IQ is a Standard & Poor's product. It just started coming out a few years ago. There are more and more companies using Capital IQ. So if you're accounting or finance, I would definitely use Capital IQ. If you're a marketing major, I would definitely use Capital IQ. Capital IQ has some really good marketing information. Like what does Nike spend on marketing as percentage of revenues versus Adidas? That's really good data to get, and you can get that from Capital IQ. So I'll try to show you both. You really want to know both of them. But I'm pulling the data from Bloomberg, so it has to be a public company that I can get the data from Bloomberg. Now, UBS is a public company, Jesus, but it's a Swiss company. So email me. If there's a company that's not on the list, email me. And when I'm pulling the data, I'll check and see if that works or not. UBS, Credit Suisse, they might work, but because they're not US, there could be some issues. I've tried like Toyota. I could get Toyota to almost work for this class. So General Motors, Jania, I think the problem with General Motors is they haven't been public that long. So they went out of business and they came back. Yeah, Facebook works, Dante, or Meta, whatever they are now. I call Alphabet Google and I call Meta Facebook. So y'all can just get used to it. I can't say Alphabet and Meta. I never will. But Facebook does work, Dante. In fact, their numbers are actually pretty, you can see why their stock is worth as much as it is. Their numbers are pretty amazing. I don't think you can find another company whose revenue per employee is as high as Facebook's. That is an incredibly profitable firm with very few employees. So I don't know any others. So Jenny, I don't know if you're saying your name right, but Jenny, I can pull GM and just see. So email me and I'll pull the data and we can just look and see, but there's a good chance it won't work. Ford might work. Okay, so JP Morgan. Oh, Jesus, I just thought of something I didn't realize. UBS, JP Morgan will not work. You cannot do financials. All right, that's the one negative. Financials are a completely different animal. The way we're going to analyze Walmart would not work for JP Morgan. All right, so sorry about that, Jesus. Now see, yeah, you can't do a bank, can't do an insurance company, so that we're kicked out. If you want to catch me on the side sometime, catch me in the Bloomberg lab. What would you do differently to analyze a bank or an insurance company versus analyzing these other companies? I can certainly help you with that. What is the net interest margin? What are these cap ratios? Those kind of things. There's definitely some things I can point you to that you can, before you interview with JP Morgan, you can definitely research on your own. And what we're doing in this Project One, the concepts, they'll work with banks, but with very different ratios. So banks don't have gross margins, they have net interest margins. Insurance companies don't have gross margins, they have underwriting margins. So it's a little bit different terminology and you just have to kind of get used to that. So kick out every bank. Now real estate, I saw a few real estate people in here. Real estate can work, even though they're financials, they can work. Just make sure I pull the data. There's a few things that you'll, for example, real estate, if you do a real estate investment trust, the REIT, it will work, but they don't have a gross margin. So when you get the gross margin part of the paper, you'll just say, this firm doesn't have a gross margin. and you'll go on the net margin, and I'll just count net margin as two things instead of one thing. So there's a few firms, Southwest Airlines, Delta, they don't have gross margins from Bloomberg. They do on Capital IQ, but they don't on Bloomberg. So you'll say the firm doesn't have a gross margin, and I'll just count your net margin twice. So there's a few firms with a little bit of quirks like that. So that's been somewhat of the issue. Real estate can work, but it's a little bit tricky on a few of the ratios. So just be aware of that. But banks definitely don't work. All right, so think about it. This is the most important thing in this class. Valero should work. The last time I checked, Valero should work. It might be one of the ones on the list. I can't remember. Yeah, Valero, if you're interviewing with Valero, do their financial analysis of Valero. They'd be really impressed. They actually have a scholarship they offer over the summer and in the fall, that if you do the application and turn it in, if you win, you get a scholarship, plus you get in their intern program. We've had a couple of UTSA students win that. Columbia, I'm not so sure about them. Yeah, send me all your ideas, Jesus, and if there's 3 or 4 that you're interested in, send them to me. First, look in the Excel sheet and see if they're there. And if not there, send me the names. It takes me about 1 minute to bring another company in. So it's not a massive amount of time for me. So I can bring in, another 20 companies in less than half an hour. So if you want to send me 5 or 6 companies you're interested in, let me know. I'm just bringing in. I'll put the Excel spreadsheet out there on Blackboard. It'd be in a file called Files for Projects, and then for Project 1, and it'd just be, companies to select from kind of files. So you'll see. The key is not, you may have a company you're interested in, but number one is a company that works well. So number one thing is a company with fairly clean data, and then number 2, that you're interested in it. If you can get a company that you're really interested in and has good data, that's perfect. But I would say you're interested in bad data, you don't want to do it. You don't want to have your first exposure to finance be a company where you're constantly having to say, well, it doesn't quite work here, but just not fun at all. I'm also going to show you, there's a lot of places in Project 1 where I'm not asking you to actually go in nitty gritty and really answer the question. So there's sometimes you're going to just say, I can't explain why this is going on. More research is needed, but I'll show you in class how you can do that more research. And if you want to do that on the project, I'll definitely give you critical thinking points for going in and actually figuring something out. I mean, a good example is, while their working capital looks really good, it's been improving and improving, but their CFO is getting worse. How can their CFO be going down if the working capital is getting better? We go look it up and say, oh, they had a $50 million pension funding last year. That makes sense. Pension funding is not working capital, but it definitely reduces cash from operations. Or they sold a subsidiary and they had a huge realized gain, and that went through, those kind of things. So you can find those. It's not hard to find, and I'll show you how to do that. It's somewhat of forensic accounting where you're just trying to say, wow, there's something going on. The frustration you're going to find, and we'll probably find this when we do it in class. You find the item, so you go to the annual report, you find an annual report, and you click on it, and it's in other. So you click on other, there's 6 things in other, and it's in other. And you've gone detail, and the $50 million item is in other. And you're like, okay, great, thanks a lot. That doesn't really tell me anything. Then you got to start going to footnotes and all those kind of things. You're trying to find the data. One thing, if you're an accounting major, if a firm has a big number that changes a lot, they have to talk about it somewhere in the annual report. So if you saw your accounts receivable jump from 20 million to 400 million, they're going to have to say something about that. So you'll find it somewhere in there. I'm not asking y'all to do that because that can take a lot of time. But if you're an accounting or finance major, I strongly recommend on at least one item, you try to do that deep dive in the annual report and try to answer that question, just so you get the practice of doing that kind of forensic accounting. So hopefully no more questions on picking your company. So what I want to do just real quickly today, we're almost out of time here. I know y'all don't like professors to go the whole time, but first class, but sorry. So the essence of finance, I do want to set this up. We'll spend the entire next class on this. Let me just set it up real quickly. by saying what we're trying to accomplish in finance. I will talk about the essence of accounting. The accountants probably aren't going to like it, but it's not my view, it's the accountants' views. I'm actually quoting accountants on their view. So, I probably should ask the finance majors what the essence of finance is. You would hope they've thought a lot about it already and have an answer. You might want to ask other finance professors what they think and see how close it comes to my answer. I doubt you're going to find an answer from a finance professor that's radically different than mine. But what is finance trying to accomplish? And then the second question is, how good of a job are they doing at it? So if you want to know my answer to the second question, go read my blog. I have a very negative blog on the finance profession. If you want to go read it, it's called The Financial Industrial Complex and What's Wrong with It. Very, very negative, especially on the investment side. I think finance has some problems. I think accounting has problems. Marketing has problems. All of our disciplines could definitely do better. But finance has some particularly tough problems. So I'm not going to cover in this class those problems, although I'll probably bring them up some as we go through, especially on the investment side. But the goal of finance is to make a decision involving these two terms, value and risk. And so your goal with finance is, in a finance class, is how does finance define value and measure value? How does finance define and measure risk? And so what we're trying to do is use financial information. That's what paper one's all about. Project one, we're going to be using all this accounting information. We're going to be using tools like ratios and some Excel models and those kind of things. We're going to be using models in the class. We're going to take all these inputs. We're going to put them together. We're going to start searching for some optimal solution. And I have the word optimal in quotes because you're never really sure it's optimal. This is a very statistical thing. So statistics say this is the best answer, but it may end up not being a good answer. So optimal how? Well, it somehow balances expected risk and expected value. We want as much value as we can get with as little risk as we can get. So your goal in this class is to understand how does finance measure value and risk? What does it mean to a finance major? Because finance will most likely, even if you're not in finance, finance will most likely have an input on most of your major projects in your career. You better understand that discipline and what they're trying to do. Obviously, you're a finance major, you need to understand this. I'm not going to say there's 100% consensus, especially on the risk side. The risk side is where we really struggle the most. You're going to see on your group project, we're going to define value as discounted cash flows. That's the way it's usually defined. We're going to define risk in two ways, though, and you'll see that. We're going to define risk, one, in the discount rate, which is the most common approach. I'm just kind of curious in your background, a risky project would have what, a high discount rate or a low discount rate? What would you think? Someone says this is a really risky project, therefore its discount rate is what, 12% or 6%? Yeah, 12%, Dante. Yeah, that's right. So why 12%? Because that's your hurdle rate. You're saying, I need this project to make me 12% because it's as risky as something else I can do that's equally risky that is going to give me 12%. So I need at least 12%. If it's not so risky, then I only need about 6%. I'll be happy. So that discount rate is really important. So on your group project, you will pick a discount rate. We're not going to spend as much time on that as we will later in the class because your project is going to somewhat be, you're going to be in your project before we get into discount rates. So I'm going to let you be a little bit sloppy on the discount rate for your project. But the other way we're going to run expected risk, and extremely important, you're going to see I push this really hard, is through scenario analysis. You're required in your group project to do a base case, a worst case, and a best case. And that's another way I like to define risk. Risk is, discount rate, how much return I need to compensate me for risk, but it's also the range. What's the best case? What's the worst case? If my best case is plus $1 million, but my worst case is minus 20 million, I might not want to do that project. If my best case is plus 20 million, my worst case is minus 1 million, that might be a great project to do. So you're going to be required in your project to do that type of risk analysis of the uncertainties. So expected value is almost always cash flow. We'll talk about that. But expected risk, there's different ways we can do it. There's different ways to come up with discount rates. We're going to cover that. In fact, you're going to have at least 3 of the Excel applications will deal specifically with discount rates. So you'll have to get into that in detail. It's a really important part of finance, coming in with discount rates. And then expected value is the present value. I don't know if you heard of present value in your accounting class, but it's the discounted value, the present value of future cash flows in today's terms using some discount rate. So several of your Excel projects will involve discounting cash flows to get you some practice on doing that, which is really, really powerful. There's some stuff that just basic to just what you need to do in your daily living. It's understanding discounted cash flows is really, really critical. All right, so what we'll do next class is we're going to delve into that in more detail, and I'm going to try to tie it to our class and how these concepts of value and risk will come up throughout the class this semester, so you get more and more comfortable with. This isn't a jargon heavy class, and it's not a formula heavy class. I will show you the formulas. I don't require you to memorize the formulas. I do require you to know what the formula is measuring, whether higher is better or lower is better, and have some way to discuss what's going on with the company. So I don't need you to memorize formulas. And the reason I don't have you memorize formulas is you're going to find very, very quickly that financial analysis is very industry specific. So we're going to be looking at generic formulas, but when you've picked, like you see, you go to Valero and you find this thing called the crack spread, you're going to say crack spread. I've never heard of that before. Well, USAA doesn't have a crack spread, but Valero does. Well, boy, I need to understand what that means and what's going on there. USAA has a surplus ratio. Valero doesn't have a surplus ratio. What does that mean? You know, so what you're going to find is we're going to be learning the concept at high level. When you get into a corporation, you're going to be learning jargon that's really specific to that industry. The concepts still apply. Turnover is still turnover. Margin is still margin. So the concepts still apply. It's just the way you implement it is going to be a very different ratio. So you need to understand the concepts. You don't need to memorize a bunch of formulas that you're going to forget 2 weeks later anyways. So don't worry about, you know, formula sheets and those kind of things. The formulas in this class are fairly straightforward. Just the interpretation that's important. All right. Any final words? I'll let you out a little early. This is the only class I'll let you out a little early.
All right, let's start. Hello, everybody. This is our second class. If every once in a while the audio just goes wild, it starts sounding really robotic or something. If y'all hear that, let me know. It usually fixes itself if I get off the Zoom and come back on, which takes about 30 seconds. So just let me know as soon as it starts happening. It should be pretty obvious that it's just not sounding good. Again, if you'll go on video, I really appreciate it because I'm still trying to learn your names and faces. That way we won't have to start February 7th. We can get to know y'all a little earlier than that. So, and be on mute in case your dog starts barking or something. So, all right. Hopefully your semester is going pretty well. What I want to do today, talk 2 things just real quick administratively. The company selection for paper 1, I will probably go by UTSA to the Bloomberg lab either Sunday night or Monday. So if there's a particular company you're really interested in, make sure you email that to me. There's so many to choose from. You have plenty to choose from. So if you don't do that, you'll just have to pick from whatever's there because I'm not going to go back and add another company. And remember, the critical thing is you pick your company before the end of next week, because the 3rd week, we're going to get into the actual template, and you're going to want to have your company open with your data so you can ask specific questions about your company. I don't have all these companies memorized, although I'm getting to know them pretty well just from going over them again and again in classes, especially certain ones that I see over and over again. But I might not be able to answer it. And hopefully one of you will ask a question in class where I can show you how to do that deep research and go in and do that kind of forensic accounting, forensic finance. So if there's a company you really want me to check, someone asks about GM, I'll put that in there and see. I don't think it'll work. We can see, but I'll add it to the file. Even if it doesn't work, I'll add it to the file, and then you can see the problems that we have that that particular company. GM may be starting to work. I keep forgetting it's been 10 years since they've come back. So, you know, they do have the data. So we'll see. I don't know for sure. But by the end of next week, you want to pick your company and then have your data loaded. So someone was asking about USAA. You cannot do USAA. It's not a publicly traded company. So USAA will not work. I wish you could, but you can't do it. Also, it's a financial company, so you don't want to do insurance companies and banks. So USAA doesn't work on a couple of levels. So you'll have to find, you know, there's thousands of companies that do work, but not in those industries, and they do have to be public. So any questions about the company selection? Again, if you're not sure and you're worried about this class, because we're covering difficult things, there are companies that are easier, the Targets, the Best Buys, the Costco's. They're much easier companies to do just because their data is just really clean. They're very stable companies. They didn't have a blow up during COVID, those kind of things. So, you know, if you're not sure, pick those type of companies. Restaurants tend to do well, although McDonald's isn't working right now, but restaurants tend to do well, Sonic's and Wendy's and those type. Some firms like Nike or Adidas not a US company, but they can work. So, you know, find something you're interested in or that you might interview with or anything along those lines. Disney tends to work pretty well. I think Facebook works now. It's got enough data that works well. NVIDIA is a great company to do as well. If you like the technology side, Apple always works. You know, there's plenty of companies that works that you should be. Someone asked about Berkshire Hathaway. I would not do Berkshire Hathaway. I don't consider Berkshire Hathaway to be a company. I consider Berkshire Hathaway to be a mutual fund that's run by Warren Buffett. So conglomerates don't work well. So GE, Berkshire Hathaway don't work well. Petco might work. So send that to me, and I can't remember if I loaded that yet. I'll look. I'm not familiar enough with Petco to know, but it might. It's an interesting company. So email it to me, and I'll look and see. Amazon should work. Amazon's a little tricky in that most of their earnings comes from AWS. So we think of Amazon as being a retailer, but they're really a cloud company. They're really a tech company. They don't make that much money off the retail side. They make a lot of revenue. So it's a little tricky in that you're trying to interpret the numbers. You just have to just realize that there's a part of Amazon that's the bulk of their earnings that we don't really think of that much, but you can. It's there. It's not as clean as a Costco. Costco is just retail. Costco doesn't have an AWS that's doing cloud computing. So the other thing you can do is pick one. You can pick two companies and load them both. And as we go through the Walmart, you might find one company just has so many problems. You're like, oh, I don't want to deal with this. I gotta, you know, every single thing we're looking at, there's something strange going on with their charts. So you could do that as well. It's a little trickier because you haven't keep track of more than one thing. Or pick a company, load it, and call me, and we'll walk through it over the phone, and I'll give you ideas on where the struggles are going to be. So if you got it down to 2 or 3 companies and you want to load those 3 and call me, we could probably within under 30 minutes, probably under 15 minutes, I can tell you why you may or may not want to do in any of the companies. So I'm getting to know these companies pretty well, and I also have a pretty good idea of what students have struggled with in the past and what headaches you may not want to have to face. One of the reasons I do live companies, it's almost a real life case, is I don't like case studies. Every case study I've seen in finance, I know Harvard does case studies and you have case study classes. Case studies are so artificial to me. The world is far more complicated than the case studies. And for these Harvard MBAs to think they're going to read a case study and tell a CEO in an industry that's been working in the industry for 20 years, they're going to come in and tell them how to run their business is pretty laughable. The world is much more complicated in case studies. And so when we use this live data, you're going to discover every company has some messy thing going on. Costco is a good example of that. Costco is a really clean company until you get to the shareholder cash flows, and they have a really bizarre dividend policy. It's just really strange. you may not be able to explain it. You'll just see it. It's really bizarre. Why did they do that? So you'll just in your paper say, wow, this is really unusual. I don't know why they do that, but you can't really answer it unless you want to do deep analysis. You could probably find it out there. So I don't know if there's any company doesn't have something that's a little strange somewhere. Usually in case studies, they clean all that up so you don't have to worry about it. So they make life look a lot simpler than it really is. And so, yeah, it's a frustration. I want y'all to experience some of that frustration because I don't want you going into the real world thinking some Harvard professor is going to clean everything up for you and hand it to you. And all you got to do is read the case. So the world's messy. So I realize that when I grade it and when I'm looking at it, I know all of you are going to face that. Just face it and do the best you can and move on to the next item. But what you don't want is a firm that everything in the firm is messy, right? You're just constantly like, oh my word, I can't explain this, I can't explain that. All right, so any questions on the company again? All right. Now, if you do know the company you want to do, it's not like you have to pick it and it's first come, first serve. So I don't mind multiple students doing the same company as long as you do your own independent work. But I do want to know your company eventually. I don't need it right away. But if you want to send me a quick email and let me know if you know definitively, if you need some more time to think about it, that's fine. But definitely have your company picked by the end of next week so that you're ready to go. Otherwise, you're not going to get nearly as much out of the class. All right, team assignments. Team assignments is not a big deal in the first part of the class because you're doing an individual project. But I do want to do team assignments because we're going to definitely. All right, Jesus is asking about how to find a company. Yeah, I put that Excel file out there on Blackboard, so just look out there. Dante, if you wanted to do Monsanto, that would certainly work, I think. I'd have to look, email me that. So, there are some pharmaceuticals that don't work. I'm sorry, Moderna, Monsanto, you don't want to do them. Sorry, I get my food company, my GMOs and my pharmacies mixed up. Moderna, that could work. One thing about Moderna is we're going to talk about that podcast, Business Breakdowns. And they do Moderna, they do Costco, they do AutoZone. So if you really want to get value out of the case, you might actually go on the business breakdowns, see what companies they covered, and you might want to pick one of those because it would be really valuable to you to do this case and then listen to that podcast. It's only a 45-minute podcast. The Costco one is just so exceptional. One of the best ones is Cinnabon, but you can't do that one because it's not a publicly traded company. So yeah, Dante, if you did Moderna, I would recommend you do Moderna and go listen to that podcast. And I think you get a tremendous amount out of it because it's really, they bring together the numbers. They use a lot of the terms. I mean, the AutoZone one, he was talking margins and turnover throughout his entire presentation. So yeah, there's ways you can get a lot more value out of this case if you really get engaged in it. So it's not just an exercise you're doing to get a grade, but you're actually engaging yourself so that it sticks with you and you can use it in future classes and use it in interviews. It's called Business Breakdowns. So just Google Business Breakdowns. It's part of the Colossus line. If you can't find it, email me and I'll put a link out there sometime, or maybe I'll show it to you next class. It's a really, really good podcast. Actually, your first of those 10 assignments, 9 of them are Excel. The first one's not Excel. The first one, I'm actually going to assign one of those business breakdowns for you to listen to and then discuss it, tie it back to the class. And if you actually want to do the business breakdown of the company you're doing, then all the better, because then you're going to really tie everything together really, really well. All right. Anything else on the companies? You should be excited about this. It's actually going to be really valuable to you, not just to this class, but also really valuable to you in other classes and in interviews and then on the job. Anheuser-Busch, I'm not sure about because, boy, there's been so many mergers and acquisitions in that area. I'm not even sure they're a U.S. company anymore. So I don't know my alcohol companies that well. I do know Brown-Forman works really well. There are some of these, I forget the politically correct word for marijuana, but there are some of these companies that are in that business that are getting interesting, but most of them are a little too young. But Constellation is really getting into that business if you're interested in that. So, you know, there's some businesses that at least have aspects of it that are interesting in what's going on today. So if you're not, you know, if you're interested, send it to me and I'll let you know. I'll pull the data. All right, so team assignments, you're going to be doing a group project. You don't really need to worry about it, but I do want to assign the teams so you can start knowing who your team members are and starting to get to know them, maybe do some group me's and those kind of things. But the way I do the team assignments, I need two things. I need to know your majors, which I'll get at that off of ASAP, but I might actually ask you for it when I ask for your schedule. So there's two things is your degree and your schedule. So what I'm trying to do is line up, you're gonna have maybe 6, 7 people on each team. I don't want a team of a bunch of finance majors and a team of a bunch of cybersecurity. So I want it broken up. I want a finance person, I want accounting, I want marketing, management, cybersecurity. I want it broken up, but I also want to make sure your schedules will somewhat tie together. So I'm gonna send you this weekend an Excel file where you can just go quickly through and block out the areas you just know won't work with your schedule. That way, when I put your team together, I don't have someone who can never meet Mondays at 7. I have someone else at Monday at 7 is the only time they can meet. So I can somewhat line that up. The frustration I have with this is I can never get 100% of the class to reply. I need 100% to reply. 70% replying doesn't help me with this. All right, so if you don't reply, I'll be hounding you the next week or two. We need to get it set up, you know, probably by the second or third week, probably by the time we're back on campus, I'd like it finalized. If you know people in the class who want to be on their teams, I recommend not. This is a chance for you to get to know new people, so it's better. Plus, groups tend to kill friendships anyway, so you probably want to do that. So, you know, I'd prefer to put you on different groups. I've had some teams. I don't like team projects, but I have seen some team projects where people become best friends, part of their team project, and they're, you know, they're friends for life. So it's a good way for networking as well. I will also be hounding you throughout the semester on your team projects, making sure that you're moving forward, that you don't have people that aren't participating. So I'm a little more hands-on on the team projects just because I don't really trust team projects. I've done my team projects. I remember writing the paper for my team while they were all watching the Cowboys game. I thought, well, this is not much fun. But so I want everybody involved and engaged, and I'm somewhat going to be pushing that. So you're honor students, so you're kind of all of the leading type. You know, you're the ones that all want high grades, are going to work hard. So it's not as much of a problem in this class as in other classes, but I still want to make sure everybody's on board. So I'll send that out. I send an email every Friday telling you where we are in the class, what you need to be doing. And so in this email this week, I'm going to send an Excel spreadsheet you can fill out real quickly. Give me the high level of your schedule so I can make sure I can line up the teams. All right. Any questions on that? Now, y'all know why professors do team projects, right? It's to cut down on grading. I had a professor when I was at a Bloomberg conference, and one of the professors said that, yeah, I'll put them in teams. I'm not going to grade all that stuff. That's not the reason I'm doing a team project. I would rather not to. This is the only class I do a team project in. I grade, you know, it takes me 15, 20 hours almost every weekend for grading. So I actually recommend you avoid classes that are majority team projects because you need your own individual work. But because you're in an honors college, they actually strongly encourage us that we do. They actually would prefer I do more team projects, but I'm just going to stick to one. So, and we'll get into that later in the class. All right, let's get into the essence of finance. So when we say finance, what are we trying to accomplish? And I recommend you do this. If you're a marketing major, what's the essence of marketing? You're telling someone, hey, this is what I'm going to do the next 50 years of my life. What's the essence of accounting? I'm going to tell you that because we're going to cover that second. What's the essence of cybersecurity? Essence of cybersecurity, that one probably be a little more straightforward, or management. But the essence of finance, I'm going to give you my view that I think is probably not going to be radically different than your other finance professors. So let's jump into it. Last class we started with this concept, if it's all about value and risk, it's a balancing act. One of the things finance gets frustrated with accounting on is accounting tends to focus so much on value and ignore risk, because risk is often not captured in GAAP accounting. GAAP accounting tends to smooth risk out. The GAAP accounting for pension plans historically has tried to make pension plans look a lot less risky than they really are, and it's caused a lot of CFOs to make really bad decisions with their pension plans. I talk about that in my risk management class. So if finance complains, accounting, we need more information about risk. And so really key to finance, you don't hear as much in accounting. It's a key issue in finance. So in finance, we're trying to either increase value, reduce risk, or some combination of the two. That's the way finance views the world. When you're talking to a finance person, they're essentially hearing blah, 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 and then they hear something on cash flow, which is value. And suddenly they perk up. Or blah, 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 and they hear something about risk, and suddenly they perk up. So you might say, hey, I got this marketing project. They're like, blah, 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 blah. We're going to be advertising, blah, 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 blah. And the effect is going to be our customer turnover is going to reduce. Oh, suddenly I hear something. So you're going to tell me I have less lost business. I'm not going to have to pay money to retain those customers. Netflix, obviously, that's a big key for them, not losing customers every quarter. We got this new marketing campaign. It's going to keep us from losing those customers. That means we don't lose their revenue, and also means we don't have to spend money trying to get them back. Well, that's great. So finance has now heard sitting on value. I don't lose as many customers. On risk, I don't have the volatility of income. That's the way finance hears these things. I was working on one project where they said, we got this website that our employees use, and they're really frustrated about it. And I'm not, I was like, well, that's fine. But what does that have to do with, we can't do a financial analysis of it. They need to get down to, well, if they're frustrated about it, if their frustration is making them less productive, now I've got something to work with. How much more productive will they be if we fix this website? If they're wasting 2 hours on something that should take them 10 minutes, then we have something to work with, and we can put that down. So when you're talking to a finance person, you just got to realize that's the way our minds are put together. We're thinking about, how can I get this into value terms? And remember, value is cash flow. How can I restate what you're talking about as a cash flow? And then risk. How risky is it? What could go wrong? What discount rate should I be using? All right. So that's the way a finance person thinks. If you're a finance major, that's not how you think. You're going to have to start thinking like this, because this is the way we think. And I love this phrase. If you're a finance major, I would try to work this into an interview. In finance, we want to be paid for taking risk. For doing something that's risky and we're getting no compensation for it, we need to somehow get rid of that. And sometimes we get paid too much for taking risk. The first person I ever hired at USAA, I hired him right out of my class. He was one of my UTSA students, really sharp. We actually wrote the job description, so he is the only person at USAA that fit the job description. So we had him in 2 weeks. It's one of the fastest hires we've ever had. And I gave him a project. We were doing these tax credits. They were really, really profitable. The return was like 23, 25%, but there's tremendous risk. And I told him, it's not much money. It was like $400, $500 million, which for USA is not that much money. It's like, I don't want to sit down and do all this analysis for these risky projects. We don't have time for that. So I told him, there's a way we can greatly reduce the risk on this project. And this is a student, I almost said kid, but this is a student right out of UTSA, not much experience. And I throw him out on this project, and he figured out a way, talking to the entity we're dealing with, to have them take a bunch of the risks that we didn't want if we gave them some of the return. And so what they did is they wrapped this whole thing with a very high quality wrap. So we didn't have the risk. And instead of us making 25%, we only made 22%. And I told him, you worked out a way for us to make 22% with almost no risk. Any of y'all interested in that? Anybody want to make 22% with almost no risk? We went from $400 million to several billion dollars in that program. And he won Employee of the Year right after that. He paid his entire salary. He's still working at USAA today. He paid his entire salary for his entire tenure, his entire 30 years at USAA with that one project. Why? Because we were getting paid for risk, but it was a lot of risk. He found a way to reduce the risk and still get paid a lot of money. We did as much of that as we could do. So if you pay too much, which we were in that case, in fact, the only downside of that project was the legal work. The legal work was quite intense. So I smoothed the lawyers and say, if you'll just get this done for me, I'll be really, really happy. Smoothed the lawyers. They got it done for me. And then I called the company we were doing this with, and I told them, hey, don't go to State Street. Don't go to Allstate. I mean, don't go to State Farm. Don't go to don't go to our competitors. Bring everything you have to us, and we'll get it done. And that's why we went from a few $100 million to billions of dollars in that. It was just enormous amount, making high returns. And the CFO was just absolutely blown away. And this entry-level student, right out of UTSA, he suddenly became, famous in the CFO area, even though he's only a couple of months into his job. So that's how finance is rewarded. You either get paid more for taking the same risk, or you get paid the same for taking less risk, or you get paid a little bit less and take much less risk. Any combination we can find. If we're not getting paid enough, don't take the risk. And I don't know if y'all familiar with this term, that in finance we can sort things. Anybody know the term sort? I know Dante does, but any of you others know what it means to sort something? Have y'all been following GameStop and all these meme stocks?
It's like betting against the market or something.
Yeah, definitely betting against. You're hoping that it falls in price, right? So why did GameStop stock rise so much? Because people were betting against GameStop. They were sorting it. And all these retail investors said, we're going to make them pay. And so they went out and they bought GameStop and caused its stock price to go up to like $400. There's no way GameStop is worth more than $20, $25, and it's still trading above $100. It's falling quite a bit. But people were sorting GameStop stock. What does that mean? They were selling the stock and they didn't own it. Can you believe that? You can sell something that you don't own. That's what sorting means. I don't recommend you do this if you heard about it the first time today, because you have unlimited loss. You can lose more than the 100%. You can, if you sell something at 50, you're hoping that its price falls so you can buy it back at 20. But if it goes to 300, you're going to lose a lot of money. That's what happened on the GameStop side. So you can actually sort things. You can't do this with everything. You can do it with stocks. You can do it with bonds. You can't do it with real estate. I mean, you can try it. Try selling your neighbor's house. They may not appreciate it, but you can sell your neighbor's Google stock if you want to. They won't know you're doing it, but your broker would know it. So you'll sell their Google stock, sell it for, I don't know, $3,000. If Google falls to $2,500, you buy it $2,500 before your neighbor knows about it. They never knew you had it, and you sold it for $3,000, bought it back for $2,500. You made $500, and you're really, really happy. So sorting means if you really think something's mispriced, you can actually bet on it. You don't have to just avoid it. You can actually bet on it being mispriced. I just saw an article today from Jeremy Grantham. I'm a big fan of Jeremy Grantham. He's saying the stock market's going to fall 45, 50%. He's not saying he thinks it's going to do that. He's not saying it might do that. He's not saying there's a high probability of doing that. He's saying I'm almost 100% certain it's going to crash. Who is Jeremy Grantham? He is a man famous for researching stock market bubbles historically. He's saying we're in a bubble that is just like all the previous bubbles. I don't quite agree with him, but we'll see. If he's right, what should we be doing? We should be sorting the stock market, right? You should be selling the stock market. You should sell all the stocks you have and then short over the top of that. If he's right. I don't know if he's right or not. He's been right a lot, but he's also in his 80s, so maybe he's not as sharp as he used to be, although he sounds pretty sharp to me. You can find him out there on YouTube. He has some interviews. He's real big on global warming. He's a very strong global warming advocate as far as spending trillions of dollars to fix it. So he's famous for that as well. But I do recommend his website. It's G as in George, M as in Mary, O as in Orange, GMO.com. And you can get on there. I think you have to register, but it's a free registration. They have all kinds of research, really good research. In fact, one of my favorite writers, James Montier, he works for them and he publishes really, really good articles. So, all right, so we want to get paid. So find some way, if you're interviewing for a job, to work that in. It's your finance. I want to be paid for taking risk. So how do you do this? Well, you got to forecast. And so some people say finance is forecasting. You're going to be doing some forecasting in your group project. You got to forecast. One of the things I think is frustrating about for finance majors is a lot of them graduate, they start their job, and the first thing they do is build forecasts, and they never had a class on forecasting undergraduate. I teach a security analysis class, and I just assumed students knew how to forecast, and I discovered that probably 95% of them had never done a forecast in their lives, and they're about to graduate. So I added an entire paper just on forecasting. I have taught in the past a forecasting class for the Investment Society. We did Facebook, we did Costco. So how would you actually do a forecast? So I agree finance majors forecast, but there's some issues with that. First of all, we use a lot of statistical inference. Hopefully you had that in your stats class. Y'all remember sample sizes, populations, samples, y'all remember all that? Y'all had all that pretty important stuff. So statistical inference, but statistical inference from where? Using historical data. How good is historical data at predicting the future? Sometimes really, really good. If you're an actuary, I think we have an actuary major in here. If you're an actuary, you're trying to figure out how many auto accidents a 23-year-old male driver is going to have driving a sports car. You've got a lot of data, and you've got a lot of confidence in that data. If you want to know how many 60-year-old overweight men that are heavy smokers, how many they're going to die, you've got a lot of data. You know exactly what that's going to be. So there is things we can forecast. You're trying to figure out how many 30-year-old women there are going to be in England in 2040. Demographics, we can forecast that pretty well. Demographics is fairly easy to forecast. Even with pandemics and everything else, we can forecast. So something's really easy to forecast. What about forecasting Amazon stock price tomorrow? How good are we at that? We're pretty miserable at that. And in fact, studies have shown that forecasting in finance is actually far worse than weather forecasts. Weather forecasters are actually more accurate than finance. So we really rely heavily on historical data. So this is a book I really highly recommend. I really think all of you should read it, but mainly finance and accounting, definitely. But I think you all, it's a really famous book by Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow. What Kahneman is showing is so much of economics and finance is based on theories that don't work when you actually test them in practice. He gives many, and if you don't want to read the book, he has YouTube videos where he actually goes through his book in the YouTube videos. And I can send you links to those if you want to. So if you don't want to really read the book, you can just go. He has a TED Talk that's really interesting, one of my favorite TED Talks. He has his Nobel Prize winning speech, which he actually has some errors in that. So you have to ignore his errors on his slide, but his Nobel Prize winning speech is really good. So, you can, in 3 kind of 20-minute videos, he essentially covers the entire book, but I would recommend you read the book. It's really, really important. And he gets into this issue of the challenge we have in finance of in economics. He's really focused more. He's not an economist, but he won the Nobel Prize in economics. I think he's the only non-economist that's done that, because he's shown the economists that their theories in economics don't actually work when you apply them to real life people. And that gets to some of the problems we have in finance. Part of the problem we have is we're not drawing our sample from the population. So if I want to know the average height of someone, let's say I want to know the average height of the American man over the age of 18. And so I go to Costa Rica and I find 200 people, and I sample 200 people in Costa Rica, men, women, children. How good is that going to do to get me the population of American men? Not going to do a very good job, is it? And I know when I go to Costa Rica, I can tell I'm taller than the average Costa Rican. I can just tell. Except for this one kid who's like 6'6" that I run into there. But most of them, are short. I feel taller in Costa Rica than I do in the US. Not a whole lot, but a little bit taller. So I do think the average man in the United States is slightly taller, maybe 1 or 2 inches taller than the average man in Costa Rica. Could I just draw from San Antonio? That'd probably get me more accurate, but what should I do? I should draw 500 men over the age of 18 from the United States. That would make the most sense, right? The sample should be drawn from the population. Well, what are we doing in finance? We're drawing from the sample of history to predict the population of the future. What did your stats class tell you about that? You would never do that. That doesn't make sense. Why would you draw your sample from something that's not the population? So we're somewhat assuming that history has some relationship to the future. So when we draw our sample from history, it's telling us something about the future. That may or may not be true. We're never really sure, but it creates a sample size uncertainty, which I think finance ignores this, but if you're a finance major, I would keep this. So let's say I look at the last 50 years of history, and I'm trying to figure out interest rates or the stock market. Is the last 50 years of history, is that a sample size of 50? Or is that a sample size of 1? Is that just one? A lot of things happened in the 50s, in the last 50 years, last 100 years. Is more years good or bad? The world's been changing, right? We didn't have the internet when I was in high school. I was thinking of phrases I could say today that if you'd said them to me when I was in high school, if I'm going to say, if I tell someone, if I went to my high school and said, I'm going to connect by Zoom in the cloud, y'all know what that means, right? If I said that in my high school class, they would know every single word I just said. Zoom, they know. Cloud, they know. They would look at me like, Ron, did you hit your head somewhere? You're going to connect by Zoom in the cloud. I don't know what that means. The world has changed quite dramatically. We're much more global. We've got a lot more globalization. We had Russia, the Soviet Union fall. We have China, much more free market, although President Xi is somewhat changing that. The world is very different today. So we're going back 100 years, give you better data than going back 50. You'd have a larger sample size. Who knows? So it's really, really hard to say. One thing we can say in finance, I just talked about measuring the heights of men. If I got a sample of 1,000 random men in the United States, do you think I'd have a pretty good estimate of the true population of American men? Y'all think that'd be enough, 1,000? Doesn't that sound like a pretty good, your stats class told you how to get the sample size, but I think 1,000 would probably be enough, wouldn't it? 2,000. Let's change the analysis. Let's say I want to know the average wealth of people in San Antonio. And I pull 1,000 people. And looking at that analysis, I say the probability of someone with a net worth over $100 million is 0. That's impossible. And then one day I do the sample and Red McCombs goes into my sample size. Guess what happens suddenly? It used to be 100 million or more was impossible. And now I've got a guy who's a billionaire. What happened? I had one sample that radically changed my entire thinking. Would that work with men's heights? What if I do a sample of 1,000 men and then suddenly I do 1,001 and 1,001 is David Robinson? Do y'all know who David Robinson is? Maybe I should say Shaquille O'Neal. I don't know who's famous today, but famous basketball. I really like David Robinson, really great guy. But what is he, 7 foot? That would be surprising, right? But would your sample size say a 7 foot man is impossible? It'd probably say it's unlikely, but it wouldn't say it's impossible. Would your statistics be absolutely shocked by David Robinson? Probably not. What if you found an 87 foot tall man? That would probably shock your analysis, right? But with wealth, that billionaire comes in and your analysis says that's absolutely impossible. That cannot happen. And yet there he is. There's Red McComb right there. What does that mean about the sample size? You're not going to know your population until you sample enough to get Red McCombs in your population. Because until then, he's impossible. Y'all see the difference between height and wealth. in which world is finance in? Wealth is the better description of finance, where we have these extreme cases that we've never seen before, and suddenly they come up. Have y'all heard of the book Black Swan by Nissim Taleb? Really, really good book. I really recommend it. What does he mean by Black Swan? He means these things that can happen, they exist, but they're so rare we think they're impossible. I don't know. I may show you later in class when we do value at risk. I'm going to show you some stock markets that are absolutely impossible. And in 2008, not only were they possible, they happen every single day of the week in September and October and November. What statistics and finance said is impossible. I was in a job where we faced that every single day of the week. I don't mean a 1 in trillion day, 1 in a trillion day, or 1 in 10 trillion. Statistics actually say that was impossible. That if you looked at a trillion universes over a trillion to the trillion entire days, that could never have happened. And yet Monday through Friday, we saw it every single day. So we had that challenge. I'm not trying to make you cynical as a finance major or at any other major, but you just need to be aware that's out there. Our finance statistics don't always capture things that happen in the real world, because the world's a little bit more uncertain than we're really to admit it. And the world is also changing. So the historical distributions are of no value. I just mentioned global warming. Is global warming going to give us more hurricanes? If you're an actuary at UTSA and you're trying to price homeowners insurance, and you just look at the history of hurricanes and use that, or are we actually going to see more hurricanes in the future? So that's a challenge. I worked with a life insurance company, and they sold annuities. What annuities do? They pay you an income until you die. Well, what if someone discovers the fountain of youth pill? We suddenly start living to 150 years old, which is certainly possible. I was listening to a podcast just here recently, where all this study they're doing on microbes, they really think they're getting close to find what's, there's no reason for the human body to age. It's really a disease. And there's scientists that think aging is a disease that can be treated. The body should be able to go on forever and ever, ever. There's no reason for it to break down and age the way it does. They'll probably find the fountain of youth pill when I'm 98 years old, so then I can spend the next 50 years of my life as in a 98-year-old body. So who knows when they'll find it? But during your lifetime, it's possible that the average life expectancy goes from 80 to 120 or 130. Who knows? We don't know. But if you're an actuary pricing that product, you've got that out there that could radically change things. So that's an issue. And then history changes the future. The fact that we went through 2020 and COVID is going to change our behavior going forward. That's not true with man's heights, right? The fact that I sample 1,000 men in the United States, does that change the average height of men in the United States? So I sample and I find a 3 foot 2 inch man, and the average is 5.8. I'm going to go to 5.8. No, it's unlikely he's going to change his height because he's below average. So yeah, but in finance, the fact that stock markets do things, the interest rates do things, it changes our behavior going forward, and the whole world changes. So we can't even rely on history. And then we have these unescapable biases. That's what Daniel Kahneman talks about, our biases that make us make really horrible mistakes. What I love about his book is he says, here's all the biases that you do have. And knowing that you have them, you're still going to be susceptible to them. You're still going to make mistakes based on those biases. But he does have solutions where he talks about it. He has a really good article that talks about how you can still make better decisions. This is why I recommend Annie Duke's book, Thinking in Bets. I think it's on the next page. Where is it? Oh, I didn't put Annie Duke's book. Oh, there it is. Yeah, there it is. Y'all see that on the right, Thinking in Bets. You'll see a lot of Kahneman in her book, but she's on the solution side. It's like, given we have these biases, what can we do so we don't make such bad decisions? And so I think it's a really good book. I highly recommend it. I've become a really huge Annie Duke fan. not just her books, but her podcasts, her speaking tours. I'd love to get her at UTSA, but she's probably a $40,000 speaker now because she's gotten so popular. She was a gambler, made a lot of money in gambling, and she's taking that gambling idea, the poker playing idea, and applied it to real life. Some of the stuff she recommends, I've been doing for years. I'm a big believer in time travel. She talks about time travel, not literal time travel, but what she says about time travel, it's kept me from gaining weight in my older years. I mean, it's things that if you think differently, you make much better decisions today that are huge, maybe not tomorrow, but they're huge 5 years from now, 10 years from now. These books over here, Peak and Range, I recommend you read them simultaneously. I mean, I'll say, but one after the other. Peak is talking about how to be really successful with certain types of way of behavior. And his focus there is what are those habits that are going to make you extremely successful? Range takes that book and he says, yeah, that sounds really good, but it only works in certain contexts. So Peak works really well if you're trying to learn golf, but it doesn't work really well if you're trying to learn tennis. What's the difference between golf and tennis? Or even better, what's the difference between chess and poker? If I told you there was a master's in chess and that she just got beat by a novice in chess, would you find that a little hard to believe? Someone who is a mastermind in chess has won all competitions, and someone who just came in playing chess, has never played it before, and they beat the master in chess. You would think that there's something wrong with that. They must have had some mental breakdown or something. What if I told you an expert in poker lost to a novice in poker? Would you believe that? Absolutely. The novice could have drawn 4 aces. Who knows? Or the novice, you know, the pro in poker is used to reading people's faces and figuring out what they're thinking. But you got a novice like, wow, this person never played before. Who knows what their face is telling you? And so that's what Peak is telling you. How do you become an expert in chess? Range is telling you, but the world isn't like chess. The world's more like poker. And that's what Annie Duke's saying. The world is more like poker than it is like chess. If you're involved in something that's like chess, then yeah, Peak's going to tell you how to be successful in that. But if you're in a world more like Range, which is more like finance, more like marketing, those type of things, then yeah, you're going to need to read both books. I think they're both very impressive. I've never had anyone that I read Peak or after reading it, they didn't go, wow, I'm so glad I read that book. That was really fascinating. So I do recommend it. You might not be like that. There's some really amazing stuff in that book. Super Forecasting. It's a book about people who forecast, separating the good forecasters from the bad forecasters. And what I love about this book and why I strongly recommend it for accounting and finance and marketing majors, those degrees that do a lot of forecasting, is they don't just tell you who are the good forecasters, who are the bad forecasters. They also talk about what are the characteristics of the good forecasters. What is it that made them good forecasters? So I really recommend that. You see a couple other books in here. I'm a big fan of Douglas Hubbard, so How to Measure Anything is, I really highly recommend that. Daniel Kahneman came out with another book called Noise. I seriously doubt he actually wrote that book. I actually think the other 2 people wrote it and they just somehow got him to put his name on it because he sells books better. So he might have, but you know, now he can publish a book now and it's just going to sell pretty strongly. So I'm not sure how much of he wrote it. This book here, you can see by the same person, Saboni. He wrote another book called You're About to Make a Terrible Mistake. You can see how, you see the title there, how biases, the whole focus on biases. So why is that important? What they're telling you is you are not wired to make good decisions, especially in finance, and especially in life. All these writers are telling you are not wired to make good decisions, but you can be better. And if you think differently, do things differently, you can get much better. And in Cal Newport, he has a TED Talk. He says, part of our problem is we're too distracted. And he's going to tell you stuff you might not want to hear, things I didn't really care for. You know, get off of social media. I've somewhat closed down my Facebook. I only get on to it. I changed my opinion, and then Facebook sent me a message saying, hey, your activity was down 98% last week. And I was like, yeah, I'm getting out of it. But Cal Newport says, if you want to be productive and produce good work, you're going to have to get rid of this distraction. Twitter, Facebook, whatever you're doing, it's destroying your mind. You might read it. He has some really good statistics in there that might wake you up to thinking, at least maybe you don't go cold turkey the way he did. It was funny, his peers kept asking him, how are you publishing all these articles? You're like a crazy man. He said, yeah, I shut down Twitter and Facebook. It's like, oh, that seems pretty simple. So you might like his book. I warn you. Now, if you don't want to read his book, go to the TED Talk, find him. He's a really good speaker. And so I recommend all of these books. You can do all of them Audible. All of them are on Audible, so you can do it while you're exercising. If you don't have an Audible account, I recommend you do this. If you're like I am, I do all my book reading while I'm riding a bike. You can get through a lot of this stuff, really, really valuable stuff. But some of them do have YouTubes. Kahneman's on YouTube, Hubbard's on YouTube, Newport, Annie Duke, probably every single one of these persons. I've heard Robert Poole or Erickson, the guy who wrote Peak. He has a really good podcast that's really interesting. Epstein, I heard him on a podcast, really, really interesting stuff. So, listen to these people. Your goal is to add value. You want to be that employee that people go to because you know how to make decisions, you know how to do analysis. This is where you make yourself a much better analyst, a much better decision maker. And that's what you're after, right? You want people going, hey, I'm going to go to Jacob because, man, last time I asked him, he did this analysis I've never seen before. He thinks differently than everybody else. That's what you're after. If you're thinking conventionally, conventional finance gives you 2008. And you don't want 2008. All right. Conventional finance has not been working well. You got to think differently. All of these authors are telling you got to think differently. All right. Any comments on that? I don't know if y'all have read any of these books yet. I don't know what you finance majors are thinking about the career in finance. If you went to my last job and you walked into my department, you would think everybody was goofing off. You see a bunch of people sitting down and reading. It's like, what do y'all do? You're reading all day. What's your job? Our job is to read all day. Oh, okay. So you're doing your job. Yeah, every once in a while I turn around and get an Excel spreadsheet and put all that together. But we read. I'll read a great article. I remember when Zach worked for me, I go, wow, Zach, this article is great. See if you can replicate this. 2 weeks later, he comes back and says, I can't replicate it. It doesn't make sense. Their numbers don't look right, or he replicated it, whatever. That's what we do. We read. We're looking for some way to look at the world differently that no one else has discovered yet. You read. Financial analyst journals, those kind of things. You're just looking for ideas. Guess what? The worst reading is. I'll probably get in trouble saying this. The worst reading you can do, it's called a textbook. Have y'all heard of that? The textbooks. I read textbooks. There's a textbook for this class. I used it the first time I taught it. And I got the multiple choice from it because we're supposed to use those. And I read those multiple choice and I said, whoever wrote these multiple choice has never worked in finance. They were horrible. So I went to the head of the department and I says, I'll keep teaching this class if I don't have to use one of those horrible textbooks because they're absolutely awful. Textbooks are written as if the world is, we understand it, everything works, everything's all taken care of. They actually encourage you not to think differently. They encourage you to close your mind and think exactly like this all the time. We're going to cover those things. You need to know those things, but we're also going to talk about where they can go wrong. So you're always, remember, you're not cynical, you're always skeptical. You always want to be skeptical. And these books will really, really help you with that. All right. Have I convinced any of y'all to start reading? Hopefully so. We'll see. If y'all want to read these books and call me after you read it and just talk through it, well, I'd love that. It'd be perfectly fine. You might, one thing I did at USA, I was a really shy guy at USA, but I wasn't as shy as I thought. I would read an article or a book, and I would somehow find the phone number of the author, and I would just call them. I did that multiple times. There was one point I had the head of the statistics department at Princeton was calling me almost on a weekly basis to talk finance. He thought I was somebody important, and I didn't let him know he was wrong. And he was giving me all these insights on modeling, on forecasting, on risk. he thought I was a decision maker at USA. I was just an entry level analyst. I mean, that's pretty cool, right? Had the head of the stats department calling you every week. So I say, go. You know, what's the worst thing that can happen? You call Annie Duke and say, hey, your book is really interesting. She hangs up on you, right? What's going to happen to you? She can't shoot you. She can't kill you. She can't torture you. She can hang up on you. So, you know, don't be rude. I've had some students are a little too aggressive like that, but try it. If it works, I've had some people that I can't get them off the phone once I call them. They're so excited someone read their article. They'd want to talk my ear off. I was like, great, this is fine. Free consulting, I'll take it. All right. So read, read, read. So is finance forecasting? I actually have a different view. It is forecast and finance, but our goal is not forecast. Our goal is risk management. All right. So if you don't remember anything else in class, and I certainly hope you will remember other things, the goal of forecasting is not to get a forecast. The goal of forecasting is to understand risk. All right. And I'm actually going to force you to do this when you do your group project. You're going to have to do risk analysis as part of your group project. All right. What does that mean by risk? It means you're more focused on the distribution of the future rather than trying to figure out the future itself. All right. I'm not trying to figure out what interest rates are going to be in 10 years. I'm trying to figure out what the range of interest rates might be in 10 years. What if the 10-year treasury is at 15% in 10 years? What if it's at negative 1% in 10 years? What does that mean? How would my portfolio have performed? How will my company have performed? All right. If I tell you the 10-year treasury will be at 4.327% in 10 years from now, what value is that? About as much value as I tell you the temperature in San Antonio on March 15, 2037 is going to be 78 degrees. That's pretty useless, right? There's no way I know that. It's useless. But a range is much more valuable. So on your case, your group case, you're going to do a best, a base, and a worst case. I'm going to require it because I just think that's absolutely critical. You need to be brutally honest about what you actually know. And I'm going to show you later what I mean by that, because we're actually overly optimistic. We think the best and worst case is that wide, and it's, you know, far, far wider than that. That's something Doug Hubbard has discovered. When people say, hey, this is my 90% range, he discovers most people 90% range is more like a 40 or 50% range. We're far too optimistic in our forecast. The world is far more uncertain, so we need to be brutally honest. And then one thing we really got to do is accept that there's some extreme events out there that can happen. And if they happen, they can really, really do us harm. And we're assuming they can never happen. That's what finance is doing today. Finance is assuming 2008 and 2020 will never happen again, because it doesn't work in our statistics. That's not a good way. Nissim Taleb is probably the pro at going through that and letting you see the problems and how we assess things in finance. So finance is, so here's how I want you to think about it. This seems really stupid, but the exercise itself is stupid, but the thought behind it, I think, is really powerful. So from 2014 to 2017, I had the goal of riding my bike at least an hour in all 50 states. All right. So it took me 3 years to do it, or 4 years. I think I did Hawaii and Alaska the last summer. But 1 year I needed to drive to West United States. So I needed a budget for my gasoline. So I went on GPS and I mapped out all my hotels and all my driving, and according to Google Maps, this trip was going to be 3,800 miles because I need to get like 18 states. And, you know, it's a lot easier to go east and go west, right? Because the states are a lot further apart. So I thought 3,800 miles. And then I said, well, you know what? I'm going to miss a turn occasionally. I'm going to want to do some side trips. I'm going to say worst case, my actual miles is going to be 20% higher than that. The best case, it'll only be 5% higher. And so that means my worst case miles was 4,600 miles. My best case is I only travel 4,000 miles. Okay. And then how many miles per gallon would I get? Well, the website says the vehicle I was renting was going to get 28 miles per gallon. But I know that's not true. So I did the base cases. I pull some off of that. And then the worst case is maybe I don't get the actual vehicle I was renting. Maybe I get a worse vehicle. So I assume my miles per gallon would be somewhere between 22 and 28. And then gas prices. San Antonio gas prices are $2.25, but I've always heard San Antonio gas prices are generally lower than the rest of the country. I looked at other places, and I had a base case and worst case. So this is what you're going to do in your group project. You're going to figure out what are those key assumptions and what range could I have. And based on that, I came up with my gasoline budget, which can be somewhere between $324 and $575. So I budgeted $575 to be conservative. The actual came out at $401. So my base case wasn't too far off. All right. So why am I showing you this? I'm actually showing this as a template for the rest of your life. Every time you do a forecast, you want to do this, but not only that, the true power of this forecast is you then go back. One thing I didn't do is collect each one of these. Wouldn't that have been valuable if I'd actually collected the exact miles I'd driven? If I'd actually calculated the exact miles per gallon I was getting, if I exactly calculated the average price per gallon I was getting, why would that be valuable? Because what if the error in my forecast, the biggest error in my forecast is the miles driven? What if my miles per gallon, my gas prices, I got that in a pretty good range, but my error was miles driven? But then I might want to spend money to get a better forecast on that because that's my problem. All right, so this is how I recommend you do forecasts. You're going to be working for corporations that don't do this. At USAA, we spent millions of dollars doing forecasts. We did 1 point forecast. We didn't do multiple forecasts. We did one forecast, and no one ever went back to find out where the errors in our forecasts were. No one ever thought to ask that question. What if our revenue forecast was always exaggerated too high? What if our expense forecasts were always too low or too high? What if we were making the same mistake over and over again? Well, guess what? We would never know that because no one was collecting that data. Isn't that a terrible thing? You're making the same mistake over and over again. You don't know. There's a famous investor. I always forget his name. He's actually famous and infamous, but he kept what he called his investment diary. He wanted to know why he made every decision he made. And then he went back after the fact and determined whether that decision was right or not. So he said, hey, I bought this stock because I thought their margins were going to expand. 1 year later, the stock price went up, but their margin didn't expand. So I was good. The stock price went up, but I was lucky because I thought the stock price was going to go up because they're going to expand their margins, and they didn't expand their margins. So I was lucky. That wasn't a good decision. It was a lucky decision. Or he might buy the stock and the margins do go up and say, okay, I was right, but the stock price fell because the CEO got fired or something like that, something he didn't expect, and say, well, I was right, had a good forecast, had good analysis, but something out of left field happened that I could not have possibly seen. So I was right, but unlucky. And this is something Annie Duke says is really, really important. You need to distinguish between the decisions you made that worked out, but they worked out because of luck, versus the decision you made that worked out because of skill. I mean, it's possible. My forecast looked pretty good, 421 versus 401, but it's possible all three of these inputs were way off. It just happened, they averaged out, so I got something close. That could be a horrible forecast, and I was just lucky it just happened to come out at 421. You're not going to know that unless you start documenting. I recommend you do it. I didn't do it over my career. Boy, I wish I had. Every decision that you make, you sit down, you write it down, and you come back. Annie Duke says it's really painful because we don't like to do things that harm our egos. She says when things work out well, we talk about how smart we are. When things work out badly, we talk about how unlucky we are. And then what we do with our peers, when something good happens to our peers, we talk about how lucky they were. And something bad happens to our peers, we talk about what a bad decision they made. She says we make our decisions not with the goal of making good decisions. We make our decisions with the goal of propping up our egos. And she says if ego is the number one priority, you're going to continue to make really bad decisions. So it's painful, right? Write this down, keep track of it. I strongly recommend that you do that. Questions on this? You're going to be doing this in your project. You're going to have a project with assumptions. You're going to come up with best and worst case scenarios. And you're going to have to be as honest, brutally honest as you can on what you really know. One thing that really bothers me on student projects like this is they come in and say, hey, our worst case scenario is we're going to make millions of dollars. I think I seriously doubt that. Over 90% of new businesses fail. I seriously doubt you just discovered a new business that the worst case scenario is you're going to make a lot of money. I just don't believe it. What does that mean? It means we're overly optimistic. Our downside scenario is not nearly far enough down. So I really will scrutinize your case. If your team tells me worst case scenario is we make a lot of money, I'm gonna go in thinking you missed something. There's something in your scenario that just doesn't make sense to me.
So how do you come up with, I guess, like your extra miles?
Well,
I mean, should like the 20 and the 10 and the 5 be used for any general worst base and best scenarios? Or did you just was that just kind of like a random choice?
Yeah, it was somewhat random because I didn't have any data.
Mm-hmm.
But what would happen if I did this every year and kept track of the data? Then I would have data, right? So then I would have better chance. I could have gone out and Googled, and that's something you do on your project. You might go out and Google. So let's say gasoline prices is really important, not just over a holiday, but over the next 10 years. You might pull in historical gas prices and look at that distribution and get some sense of how high or low they might be. So you're relying somewhat on history to do that. You might go to a website that does forecasting and they say oil prices, they may actually tell you a distribution. You might rely on them. I'm going to talk about it when we do some example cases in the future. Sometimes it's surveys, and that's something you could definitely do. You could do a survey on Facebook with your friends and see what they say. You know, if you're trying to figure out what percentage of people will use a kiosk versus standing in line at a pharmacy, you might go out to Facebook and see if you can get 100 people to reply. And maybe that'll help you not only know your base case, but give you some insight on best and worst case scenarios, you know, that kind of thing. So yeah, there's no rules on this. That's why forecasting is so difficult, because every forecast is its own thing. And finance, we're desperate for data. So you got to know where that data is and try to find it. But yeah, a lot of times it's just a matter of using your best judgment if you don't have any data, but you're hungry for data. If you can find some data, go out and find it somewhere and use that. Have some basis for that assumption. But yeah, these numbers, I had some basis for some of them, but a lot of them, I was just guessing. Let me show you what Doug Hubbard does. So this is an exercise he does. I actually went through this exercise. And what he does is he gives you a bunch of questions and he asks you for your 90% range of confidence. And if you know your 90% range, you should be right 90% of the time, and the answer should be outside of your range 10% of the time. Now, if you're right, if the right answer is inside your range 100% of the time, then your ranges are too wide. If the right answer is outside of range 40% of the time, your ranges are too narrow. You can see my first attempt. Don't look at the answers because some of these are probably embarrassing. Like, how old was Charlie Chaplin when he died? Number 8. I had no earthly idea. So I said between 30 and 90. It was actually 88. So I just barely got it in my range. Right? He asked, how much does Doug Hubbard's book, How to Measure Anything, weigh? I had no idea because I listened to it on Audible. And I don't know how much books weigh anyway. And I don't know anything about kg. I don't even know what kg is. I don't know what I know what a pound is, but I don't know what a kg is. So I said half a kg or 4 kgs. Well, it was 0.56. All right. But you see, I was wrong 3 out of 10 times. How many times should I have been wrong? On average. Someone answer that just so I know you're with me here. 1 time. Good, Rebecca. Okay, y'all got it. Good. Rebecca, Patrick. Yeah, 1 time. I was wrong 3 times. So then he has us do it again. And what he shows you, it's really interesting. It's about a 3-4 hour class. By the end of his class, when he gives you 10 questions and asks for your 90% confidence, you're right 90% of the time, you're wrong. He actually shows you what he calls it calibration. He teaches you how to calibrate more accurately, which is a really powerful thing. And he will do these classes specific to an industry too. So he can see if the engineers really know what they're doing. So yeah, it's a powerful class. I actually started off really bad. I thought I was a lot smarter than I was, and I actually don't know stuff as well. Don't look at the ones I missed. Boy, it's kind of embarrassing. Centimeters again, number 3. I didn't know that. What is the air distance from New York and Los Angeles? I probably should have gotten closer on, but I was close. My bottom range was kind of close. All right, so this is what I want you to think about in your group projects. You're not as knowledgeable as you think you are. We're all far less knowledgeable than we think. I don't like the word ignorant, but our ignorance level is higher than we think it is. We have too much confidence. Knowing that doesn't mean that you beat yourself up. Knowing that means you're just more brutally honest. So when you do your group project, you need to press those ranges out. So someone says, I think it's between 8 and 12. And you say, well, you know what? Why don't we use 6 and 14? We have some data for 8 and 12, but it's a little sketchy. Let's go 6 and 14 because, I know we're more optimistic than we really are. So I love this as a really good exercise. Annie Duke does some of this in her analysis as well. So just to give you an example, there's 2 numbers. I won't tell you what they are, but this top one, the average has been 3.21. The worst was 10%. The standard deviation was 4%. So I gave a worst case scenario of negative 12%. I said, given this data, I want something that has a probability of 0.3%. So given all this data, I'm going to say the worst case scenario, I'm going to tell my boss, the worst case is 12% loss. Down here, higher, the second one on the bottom right, higher is worse. So the average was 350, the standard deviation was 88, the max was 694. So my 0.3 case, I tell my boss, you know what? I think the worst case is 706. I don't think this number will ever go above 706, okay? And then 2020 happened. There's 2020. How good was my worst case scenario? I said 12 was my worst case. In 2020, it went to negative 34. Pretty bad forecast, right, for real GDP? This one is jobless claims. My worst case scenario was 705. It actually almost hit 7 million. What would historical data tell you about the probability of a 7 million jobless claim week? It would say it was mathematically impossible. There's no way that could happen. But then COVID hit. So we should always be thinking about this, that there's these extreme events that just blow us away. All right. So the 2 things we got to be careful in finance to say it's different this time. So ignore history because, wow, the Nikkei Japan market's just going to take over the world. Japan's the place to be. Our tech stocks in 1999, forget about valuation. It's different this time. They're going to do well. What happened in these 2 markets? It wasn't different this time. Japan fell 90%. NASDAQ fell over 80%. But it's also dangerous to say it's not different this time. So people saw really low treasury yields in 2008, and they say, well, that's not going to last long. Interest is going to come back up. And what did they do? They stayed down for over a decade. So it's tough. Sometimes history does change, and you can say it's different this time. Sometimes history doesn't change. You got to be careful. Both of those are really dangerous things to say. All right. So, boy, I'm not going as fast as I thought I was. So, what is value? What is risk? Value is discounted as future cash flows. Risk is going to be our discount rate to value those. We're going to be doing a lot of that in this class, discounted cash flows. If you haven't done that, you should have done some of that in your accounting class, but if not, I'm going to assume you've never seen this before, and we're going to start from scratch on this. If you're a finance major or an accounting major, you better be the king or queen of discounted cash flows. Should be something you can do in your sleep without even thinking about it. So discounted cash flow is the most important tool in finance. We do it all the time. Future cash flows are a measure of value. We discount them. So here's finance right here in a nutshell. I'm going to finish up with this, and I'll probably go much faster next class so we can get into that class notes next class. I will put this PowerPoint out there. I added some stuff on the end that I may not go through in next class. That's not in the one I loaded in Blackboard. So I'll load this actual one in Blackboard. But this is what finance people do. It's a 5-step process. Number 1, you forecast. What do you forecast? You forecast future cash flows. Number 2, you assess risk. You do that by figuring out what discount rate are you going to do to evaluate your forecast. Number three, the easy part is you add up all those discounted cash flows, you figure out what something's worth today. We call that the intrinsic value, what it's worth to us. Number four, you compare your intrinsic value to the market price. Your intrinsic value is greater than the market price, you think it's worth more than what the market's selling, then you buy it. If the intrinsic value is less, then you avoid it or you short it. All right. Or if you're going to do the group project, you have intrinsic value of this project. You think the intrinsic value of this project is $300,000, but to do this project, it's going to cost you $500,000. You're not going to do it. You're not going to spend $500,000 to get something that's worth $300,000 to you. So the present value is $300,000, but the cost is $500,000. You get a negative net present value. You're not going to do it. All right. This is our class right here. You're going to be doing this throughout this class in different steps. I'll try to tie you back to this schematic. If you are a finance major, this is the next 50 years of your life. And that to me is exciting because each one, especially the first two steps, that's where you add your value. And I find them incredibly fun, exciting. I still miss working in finance. The only reason I didn't like it is I got promoted and then I started to manage people. And some of you are management majors. You like that. I'm not a people managing person. I don't like that. I'm not a people person. And so my job became more people management than doing this. I wanted to do this. If you're a finance major, you should love doing this. And you'll be doing this multiple times, millions of times over your career. So hopefully you get it. You look at this, say, wow, that's my job's pretty simple. As Warren Buffett says, finance or investing is simple, but not easy. Pretty simple. It's forecasting and then put it in today's dollars and making decisions. It's pretty straightforward. Any questions on that? That's the key to this whole class right here. All right, so next class we'll start here real quickly. I know there's more slides going to be out there. I'll real quickly show you those. Really, the very end of this presentation, you can just read my blog and you'll have everything, and you can read it in your spare time. You don't have to do this part of the class. All right. Any final questions or any admin things anybody's having an issue with?